Marco Vitelli was not a man people looked at twice. Not because he was ordinary, but because looking at him twice felt dangerous. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and always dressed in dark clothes. His face rarely showed expression. His voice was low and calm even when he was angry, which somehow made it worse. In Naples, his name was spoken carefully, the way people speak near something that could break. He controlled a network of men, money, and silence. He owned buildings, businesses, and loyalties. He made decisions that other men carried out without question. He had built all of this not because he wanted power for himself, but because power was the only thing in the world that could keep his brother safe. Nico was 24 years old. He had been born with a condition that left his mind at the level of a young child. He could not live alone. He could not cook for himself, or manage money, or understand why strangers sometimes looked at him with pity. He laughed loudly at things that were not funny to other people. He cried easily. He loved chocolate biscuits, sunny windows, and drawing birds in thick crayon strokes on white paper. When their parents died in a car accident, Marco was 19 and Nico was 7. Marco stood at the graveside and made a silent promise to 2 wooden coffins. No one would ever hurt Nico. No one would ever take advantage of him. No one would ever make him feel small. That promise became Marco's entire life. He built the villa on a hill outside the city and filled it with cameras. 47 of them. Every hallway, every room, except the bathroom, every corner of the garden. Each morning before his meetings, Marco sat in front of a bank of screens and watched the previous night's footage. He was looking for anything out of place. A door left open. A caregiver who moved too quickly near Nico. A stranger near the perimeter wall. He hired caregivers and fired them just as fast. One was let go for speaking sharply. Another for leaving Nico alone for 12 minutes while she made a phone call. A third was dismissed because Nico had stopped smiling in the weeks she worked there, and Marco had noticed on the cameras that she never once sat beside his brother. She always stood. By the summer, the agency had quietly stopped returning his calls. Nico sat in his sunny room on the 2nd floor and drew birds. He did not understand why the helpers kept leaving. He only knew that when they left, he felt it like a small wound. He stopped drawing as much. He ate less. He sat by the window more, watching real birds in the garden, not saying anything. Marco's enforcer, a large quiet man named Teo, checked on Nico during the day. Teo was loyal and dependable, and completely unable to connect with another human being in any gentle way. He would stand in the doorway of Nico's room, look at him, say everything is fine, and then leave. Nico called him the statue man. Marco watched all of this on the cameras each morning and felt something he never felt in his professional life. He felt helpless. He was a man who solved problems. Every obstacle in his world had a solution that involved money, pressure, or fear. But his brother's loneliness could not be solved with any of those things. Nico needed someone who was patient and warm and genuine, and Marco had driven every such person away with his impossible standards and his suspicious eyes. His lawyer found a different agency in Rome, a smaller one. He sent them a list of requirements so long that the agency owner later said it was the most detailed document he had ever received for a domestic position. But he had one person he thought might survive the situation. Her name was Elena Russo. She was 28. She had spent 4 years volunteering with adults who had disabilities, and she had 2 years of formal caregiving experience on top of that. She was calm, patient, and not easily frightened. The agency owner told her very little about the employer, except that the pay was excellent and the household was private. She arrived on a rainy Tuesday in October, with a single bag and sensible shoes. She had tried to find information about Marco Vitelli online and found almost nothing, which she thought was unusual, but decided not to worry about. She was hired to help Nico. That was what she focused on. The villa was larger than she expected. The guards at the gate looked at her without speaking. The entrance hallway was clean and cold. A woman named Carla, who managed the house, showed her around with a tight expression, as if she expected Elena to turn and run within the first hour. Elena did not run. She asked about Nico's schedule, his likes and dislikes, what upset him, what comforted him. She asked about his health history and his daily routine. She took careful notes. Carla seemed surprised by this. On her first morning, Elena went to Nico's room and knocked softly. There was no answer. She tried the door and found it unlocked. The room was bright from the large window, and the walls were covered in bird drawings held up with small pieces of tape, hundreds of them. Every type of bird, every color, some with names written in large childlike letters underneath. Nico was sitting on his bed facing the wall. Elena did not enter the room. She sat down in the hallway outside the door and began to hum. It was an old song her grandmother had sung to her when she was very small. A Neapolitan folk tune with a simple rise and fall, like a boat on calm water. Inside the room, she heard the faintest sound, a crayon moving on paper. She kept humming. After 20 minutes, she stood up, said quietly through the open door that she would be downstairs if he wanted company, and walked away. That afternoon, Nico came downstairs. He did not speak to her. He sat at the far end of the kitchen table and watched her prepare his afternoon snack, which Carla had told her was chocolate biscuits with warm milk. Elena set the plate and cup in front of him and sat down at the other end of the table with a book. She did not stare at him. She did not try to fill the silence. Nico ate all the biscuits. The next morning, Elena noticed how he organized his crayons, warm colors on the left side of the box, cool colors on the right. She started arranging his breakfast the same way. Orange juice on the left, water on the right, the warm foods closer to him, the cooler ones further away. Nico stopped when he sat down. He looked at the tray for a long moment. Then he looked at her. She was reading her book and did not look up. He picked up his fork and began to eat. By the end of the first week, he would walk into whatever room Elena was in and simply exist near her. He did not always talk. Sometimes he just wanted to be in the same space. She understood this. She let him. By the second week, he was showing her his drawings. He would bring one over carefully, holding it by the edges the way a person carries something precious, and hold it out to her. She would look at it seriously, for a full minute, before she said anything. He noticed this. He brought more drawings. By the end of the first month, he said her name, clearly, deliberately, the way a person says a word they have been practicing inside their head. Elena. Carla, who was passing by the door when it happened, stopped walking and pressed her hand quietly to her mouth. On the 47th camera, in the corner above the bookshelf in Nico's room, a small red light blinked steadily. Marco watched the footage every morning. He had watched Elena arrive and walk through his armed guards without a change in expression. He had watched her sit outside his brother's door and hum. He had watched the crayons. He had watched the breakfast tray. He had watched, over and over, the moment Nico said her name. He did not tell anyone what watching that footage felt like. He told himself it was professional observation. He told himself he was simply verifying that the arrangement was working. He told himself a lot of things in those early weeks, and none of them were entirely true. In November, word reached him through careful channels that a rival family had learned of Nico's existence. They had framed it as information, not a direct threat, but Marco understood the language. Everyone in his world understood it. Your brother is a vulnerability was not an observation. It was a warning about what they now considered available to use. Marco handled it the way he handled everything, quickly and completely. Within 72 hours, the situation was resolved in a way that left no room for repetition. He added guards to the villa perimeter. He reviewed every security protocol. He ran background checks on all current staff for the third time. But the fear did not leave the way it usually did after a threat was removed, because now he saw it clearly. He had built all of this to protect Nico. The walls, the cameras, the men at the gate. And yet all it had taken was one piece of shared information for someone to point at his brother and say, there, that is where he is soft. For the first time in his life, Marco understood that being powerful and being safe were not the same thing. Elena arrived the morning after Marco increased the perimeter security and walked through 8 additional guards, as if they were garden furniture. She learned the name of each one by the end of the day. She brought Nico his breakfast and told him the birds in the garden were becoming braver because the weather was getting colder and they needed to eat more. Nico decided they needed names. He and Elena spent the afternoon naming every bird that landed on the terrace railing. On the screens in his office, Marco watched his brother laugh until he shook the table. One evening in late November, Marco came home earlier than expected and found Elena still at the villa. It was past 9 o'clock. He found her sitting in the hallway outside Nico's room, which was quiet. She explained, without being asked, that Nico had had a difficult afternoon. He had become overwhelmed and upset, and it had taken a long time for him to settle. She had not wanted to leave until he was calm and sleeping. Marco said she should have called someone. She said Nico had asked her not to go. They stood in the hallway for a moment, then Marco asked if she wanted tea. It was the first time he had offered anything to a member of his household staff. He was not certain why he did it. They sat at the kitchen table and talked. Not about Nico at first. She mentioned she had a younger sister once who had been born with a heart condition and had died when she was 11. She said she understood what it meant to build your whole life around one fragile, irreplaceable person. She said it quietly, not looking for sympathy, just offering it as something true about herself. Marco was quiet for a long time after that. Then he told her about the car accident, about standing at the graves at 19 years old with Nico beside him, holding his hand, and not understanding what the wooden boxes meant. He had never told anyone that story. Not Teo, not his lawyer, not anyone. He did not know why he told her. Later, he thought it was because she had already seen the most important thing about him through the cameras, and the guards, and the careful silence he kept around himself. She had seen that he loved his brother, and once a person knows that, there is not much left to protect. December came cold and bright. Nico drew 12 birds in one day and held them all up for Elena to see. Marco, watching the footage the next morning, counted them twice. He told himself something was becoming complicated. He told himself to be careful. He told himself that what he was doing, which was watching 11 minutes of footage that he did not need to watch again, was not what it looked like. He called Elena into his office one afternoon and told her in a professional and unhurried way that her contract would be ending at the close of the month. He thanked her for her work. He said it had been satisfactory. Elena looked at him for a moment. Then she asked if Nico knew. Marco said that was not her concern. She said, with a calmness that he found difficult to look directly at, that it was her concern, because Nico trusted her, and ending this suddenly without preparation would hurt him in a way that would take a long time to repair. She said if it was his decision she would accept it, but she asked that he be the one to tell Nico. Marco said nothing. She thanked him for his time and left the office. He did not end the contract. January arrived. One evening, Marco came to find Elena before she left for the day. He was standing in the doorway of the sitting room where she was gathering her coat and bag. He was not certain how to begin, so he simply said that he did not know how to be a normal person around his brother. Elena turned to look at him. He said he had spent so long being the person who protected Nico that he had forgotten how to simply be present with him. He asked how she did it. She thought about this for a moment, then she said he needed to stop watching from doorways and walk through them. The following Saturday, Marco cleared his entire schedule. His assistant sent 3 calls to voicemail. Teo stood outside the villa in some confusion, and Marco spent the day at the kitchen table with his brother and a box of crayons. He did not know what he was doing. Nico did not care. He handed Marco a blue crayon and pointed at a blank sheet of paper and said, "Make a bird." Marco drew something that looked almost nothing like a bird. Nico studied it very seriously, and then told him the beak was too big. Elena passed the doorway once and looked in. Marco was bent over a piece of paper with the concentration of a man solving a very important problem, and Nico was watching him with a small, proud smile, and the kitchen smelled like the cocoa Carla had made for them both. Elena kept walking. She was smiling too widely to stop herself, and she did not want Marco to see. Spring came slowly. The garden warmed. The birds Nico had named in November returned to the terrace railing. Nico told Elena their names, as if introducing old friends. One afternoon, Elena was helping Marco trim the roses along the garden wall. He had never done this before in his life, and he was doing it with careful, serious effort, which was both admirable and somewhat funny. Nico appeared at the second-floor window above them, holding a piece of paper. He shouted down for them to look. It was 3 birds, 2 large ones standing side by side, one smaller one between them, wings slightly open, as if it had just landed. "That is us," Nico called down, very pleased with himself. Marco looked at the drawing held up in the window. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Elena. Elena looked at the roses, then at Marco. Neither of them said anything. The afternoon stayed warm and quiet around them. The real birds on the terrace railing ruffled their feathers and did not fly away. And for the first time in many years, the cameras in the villa were not watching for danger. They were simply recording ordinary life. A brother and a woman in a garden. A drawing held up against the spring sky. Two people standing close together, saying nothing, in the way that sometimes means everything.